In Chapter 13, we're going to be looking at leadership ethics. Now, this chapter is very different than the other chapters. There's no specific theory that is presented as being useful for being a leader, but we're going to be talking about different ways of looking at what is the right thing to do. Now, first of all, we can start off with the definition of what is ethics, this study. It's the study of morally right behaviors and character. So it's very broad because it encompasses all of behavior and all of human character, and it can be very controversial because people don't necessarily agree with. So we can say that the study of ethics is concerned with the kinds of values and morals an individual, a culture, or a society believes is appropriate. So this means that things are very, very subjective if you want to say, it's just what the individual believes is important, or it's important to understand what culture believes, or the entire society perhaps made out of several cultures. So it's a very broad topic that can be very controversial because people have different views. But it's especially important for leadership because since the 1960s, when television became popular and the press decided to no longer cover up moral failures of leaders, the ethical failures of leaders have become more and more apparent, and people are seemingly more and more concerned about them. Now, the textbook starts off by describing Kohlberg's stages of moral development because it kind of gives some tools for talking about ethics. Now, it's important to understand that Kohlberg's stages of moral development isn't a theory of ethics. It simply describes how individuals take more and more factors into consideration as they get older and more mature, as they develop more. And so we have 6 stages designed into 3 levels. And so when you're a little kid, you're more concerned about level 1. And as you grow up, you become more concerned about level 2. And according to the theory, if you become really morally developed, you take in consideration stages 5 and 6. Now, it's important to note that Kohlberg's stages of moral development does not provide any guidelines for making moral decisions. In fact, any behavior can be justified as being ethical, no matter how unethical it is, using the factors and the principles that are discussed in Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So it's not a theory that helps you figure out what's moral. It's a theory that helps you understand, different people consider different things. Now, it's highly criticized also. A lot of stage theories developed in the 1950s, 60s, early 70s don't really play out too well. It's more, there's lots of factors going on that influence people. And so one of the reasons this is highly criticized, it says that the most morally developed people basically think like male professors of the 1960s. And if you don't, then you're not as morally developed. So there's quite a few limitations, but it does give some tools for helping thinking about moral development. Now let's talk about actual ethical theories, how people decide what's right and wrong. Now we've got this little table in the book that describes and categorizes different theories. So there's 2 big domains, 2 big groups of theories. There's conduct theories that focus on how somebody should behave, how they should make a decision, and then there's character that focuses on basically how you should live out your life. So on this slide, we're going to look at the conduct theories. And we have 2 groups. There's one that focuses on the consequences of behavior, and these are called the teleological theories. Teleological means looking at the end point, the outcomes. And then there's the deontological theories that focus on one's duty and the rules that should follow. Now the teleological theories, There's 3 of them that are presented. Now you might notice that here I had to squeeze in this third one, altruism, because it didn't make it into the chart, but it's in the book, but not in the chart. And here we've got a little graph that shows this vertical axis is concern for self-interest, high and low. And here we've got concern for the interest of others, where we've got low and high. And the teleological theories can be grouped into 3 categories. The first one is this idea of ethical egoism, that everybody should just do what's best for themselves, not being too concerned for others, but everything will play out and balance each other out, and is everybody seeking their own self-interest. Personally, I don't think those types of theories work very well, because there's going to be an awful lot of people that are squashed along the way. The medium interest for others and medium self-concern is utilitarianism. And in utilitarianism, you try to maximize the good for the most number of people, which is really difficult because we know we have tons of biases, and we're always going to think that we're not getting enough good for ourselves, and we'll tend to downplay the good that for other people that might come out of it. And we just can't think clearly very well. A third set of teleological theories would be around altruism. And I would say, at least for me, I think that's the best approach for it. I need to be especially concerned for others if I'm going to be acting ethically. I need to constantly be asking myself, how can I avoid harming others, and what can I be doing good for them, even if it costs me some time? Because my own personal value system says that I should be loving other people. So those are some teleological theories, the consequences theories, focusing on conduct. Now there's also deontological theories that focus on duties, and these are often having to do with laws or codes of ethics. So a lot of times there's a professional code of ethics. I'm a psychologist, and so when I join professional associations, I have to obey a code of ethics. My wife is a licensed therapist, and there is a very strict code of ethics that she needs to follow to keep her license. There's also laws. As a citizen of a country, we're responsible for keeping the laws that are often are there to prevent us from acting unethical. And then there's also general ethical principles, maybe commandments saying, for example, thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is just something wrong. If you've committed yourself to marrying somebody, you need to be faithful to them. So that would be like an ethical principle or a law. So those are some of the deontological theories. These were the teleological theories, and together they make up the conduct group of ethical theories. Now the other is character or virtue-based theories. And the character or virtue-based theories focus on a leader's character. So rather than emphasizing what to do in a specific situation, it emphasizes how people should be, their habitual responses to situations. Now, the distinction between the two might not be super clear, but we're looking at habitual responses rather than specific situations. And the advantage of the ethical theories is that it enables we can focus on, we need to train people to be more ethical, to have a more ethical character, and so we can focus on moral development that way. So some examples of virtuous traits, some character traits that people should work on developing would be courage, honesty, fairness, justice, integrity, humility. Another group might be like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are virtues that can be developed. So that's a second main approach to ethics. Now, one of the reasons that ethics is so important in leadership is that leadership can go really, really bad and do a lot of evil things. We can look back to World War II and Hitler and all the evil that was going on there. And it wasn't just the result of an evil person. There were a whole lot of factors that came into play. And this is what's known as the toxic triangle. We need to make sure that these things don't come into to play today, whether it's on a national level, an international level, an organizational level, or even a department level. There's three factors that can cause things to just go totally haywire and become extremely dangerous to everybody involved. First of all is the idea of destructive leaders. If you have somebody that has charisma, which can be good, personal power, which can be good, but narcissism, who's more concerned about themselves than they are other people, who live in, one of the things that characterize narcissism is dishonesty, selfishness, the inability to distinguish between the truth and fiction. If you have somebody that has those characteristics or other negative life themes, or an ideology of hate that's bent on the destruction and the suppression of some group, you've got a destructive leader. And destructive leaders can do a lot of bad, not just because they're destructive leaders, but if there's susceptible followers and there's conducive elements. Now, what do we mean by susceptible followers? There's kind of two types. There's, first of all, the active ones, the colluders, and this is why narcissists kind of flock together. If somebody's got a lot of ambition and they want to overpower other people's for their own good, they often team up with other people with the same ambition or the same similar worldview, and because they can share the same bad values, and so they'll actively work with destructive leaders. But then there's also conformers who just go along with it because they need somebody to lead them. Maybe they have low core self-evaluations, and the toxic leader is spewing out a message that appeals to them. Maybe they're not very good at critical thinking and have what we could call low maturity. So those would be different types of susceptible leaders. So when the destructive leader and susceptible followers are in the right environment, when there's systemic factors that allow the two to influence each other and increase, things can go really bad. So for example, if there's instability in the society, there's a lot of things changing and a lot of people feel threatened because of the changing. When cultural values are changing and immorality is more accepted, people will be more tolerant of destructive leaders. When there's no checks and balances in the institutions, when somebody can amass all the power and there's no one that checks that power, controls it, that produces this toxic triangle of leaders, followers, and the environment that can allow entire cultures, organizations, or departments to go really, really bad. So that's the dark side of leadership, the toxic triangle. Now, Northouse presents 5 principles of ethical leadership. He doesn't try to present them in any fancy theory. These are just 5 principles that are just really good to follow, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, because acting ethically is really central to the leadership process, and it needs to be, and we need to be putting into practice ethical principles. First of all, because leadership is influence. And so if we act unethically, we're going to influence others to act unethically also. There's also, it's important because leadership is supposed to is working with people to accomplish mutually beneficial goals. And if we are working with people to accomplish goals that are not going to benefit others, we're starting to move into that toxic leadership category. And it's also important because the impact that leaders have is more important than the impact that non-leaders have. They establish the organization's cultures and culture, and values. So what the leadership values, the leader's ethics, is especially important. So what are these 5 principles that Northouse proposes? First of all is the idea of respecting others, treating every single individual as being important, never putting them down, never insulting them, never willingly hurting them, because people are innately valuable. They're infinitely valuable. And so we need to respect them and show that we think that they're important. Secondly, we have this idea of serving others. If we're in a position of leadership, we need to use our power to do good to others, to benefit the others. We shouldn't be a burden or a source of pain to others, but we should be a source of benefit to others. We need to serve them. Thirdly, we need to always show justice. We need to treat people fairly. There can be no favoritism, no prejudice, no bitterness, no resentment. We need to treat people fairly in every single situation that we do, making sure that bad things are put out and that good things are rewarded. Fourthly, there's got to be honesty. There can't be any deception. There can't be any lying. There can't be any trying to hide things from people who have a need to know things. Everything that we need to do needs to be completely honest. And fifthly, we need to build community, healthy relationships with each other so that people benefit each other, that they're strengthened from working together and not attacked, not weakened, not destroyed, not injured, but that they're in a healthy environment that allows them to thrive and become better and better people. So I think these 5 principles of ethical leadership are really important, and everybody should reflect on how are they implementing them in whatever organizational situation that they're in. Now, let's look at some of the strengths and the weaknesses of looking at ethics in a leadership context. The strengths are that ethical theories provide direction on how to think about ethical leadership and how to practice it. Because just having right ideas about ethics doesn't matter if you don't actually put it into practice. It's also good because it reminds us that leadership is a moral phenomenon and that ethics should be considered as an integral part to the study of leadership, and that we can't think of leadership and how we should be influencing people without considering the moral aspect of it. And it highlights principles and virtues that are truly important in life, things that we can actually do that will have an impact on people and that impact our lives and all the people around us. So there's an awful lot of value in thinking about ethics. There's also some criticisms of the ethical approach to leadership. One of the reasons is that there's this lack of a strong body of traditional research findings to substantiate the theoretical foundations. Does being kind to people really make for a better work environment? Intuitively, the answer is yes. But what kind of data do we have for virtue in organizational situations? A lot of times there's a conceptual confusion regarding the whole concept of ethics. And so this makes ethics hard to measure, to study. How are we going to define ethics? And part of the reason there's this confusion is that it's strongly influenced by personal opinion and worldview. And there's lots of different worldviews, lots of different opinions, so there can be a lot of different conceptions of what's ethical or not. Now, if you've watched these videos before, you know that I teach at Azusa Pacific, and we're committed to a very specific worldview, this worldview of putting ourselves in God's hand, trusting God, and following Jesus Christ. So we like to link the material that we talk about to biblical concepts. And in terms of ethics, Of course, the Bible has an awful lot to say, but there's one passage that I especially like that's very much a summary of everything that the Bible teaches about ethical behaviors, especially for those of us who want to personally follow Jesus Christ. The Bible says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other." The commandments are summed up in this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. When I look at how I treat people, I want to continually ask myself, am I loving them? Am I doing what's good for them? Am I being a source of good for them and helping them and loving them?